Alright, so this is a response to K-Bane's resurrection video. Sorry that it's dark out and that you can barely see me and all, but whatever, it's not really important, just listen to what I'm saying. Alright, so K-Bane had 5 facts about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and he said that he challenges any atheist to take these facts into account and present a narrative other than the resurrection of Christ. Okay, so that's a good challenge. The first fact was that Christ was crucified. Now, I know that a lot of atheists today have come around to the viewpoint that Christ was never an actual human being. They challenge the existence of Christ even as just a mortal man. I don't fall into this particular school of thought simply because I don't think that Paul could have started it out of thin air. I think that there had to be some people that were following this religion before that. There had to be a sense that things were coming around to this guy's perspective. So what I think was there was probably a radical rabbi that was going around preaching things that the other rabbis didn't approve of, and it eventually got him crucified. So I believe that happened. I don't believe that any of the quotes attributed to Jesus were really his. I don't believe that any of the actions that he supposedly took or miracles that he supposedly performed actually occurred. But I do think that there was probably at least a guy who started a cult and was eventually killed, much like David Koresh. Or Charles Manson, only he wasn't killed, he was just imprisoned. But, so was Jesus crucified? Okay. If he existed, he was probably crucified. However, I'd like to point out that this is in no way evidence to support the resurrection of Christ. It is definitely a prerequisite. Now, I mean, because to be resurrected, you have to first die, obviously. But just, everyone dies all throughout history. I mean, it's not a piece of evidence toward a resurrection. It's ridiculous. So right off the bat, the first point is moot. I mean, it's like saying that because I have a lighter, that's evidence towards me starting a forest fire. It's just it would be laughed out. So the first point is true in my opinion, but probably moot. The second fact was the tomb of Jesus Christ was empty. Now, I have to dispute this fact entirely and say that not only was the tomb of Jesus not empty, but Jesus did not have a tomb. I think this for a number of reasons. First of all, it was standard practice for the Romans to bury the victim, their victims of crucifixion in mass graves. So, you're not going to see a lot of, think about the story of Jesus. We're to believe, in the context of the Christian story, that Jesus was not just crucified, but brutally tortured. The Jews met on Passover, which they would never do. In order to condemn him, they that they're given an option, do you want to let this murderer go or do you want to let Jesus go? And they choose the murderer. The Romans whip him mercilessly. People gather around in the streets and throw stones at him as he's carrying his own cross up to the Golgotha where he can be crucified. They don't tie him to the cross, which was standard practice. They instead nail him to the cross, which makes no sense because they didn't think he was anything special, so why would they use special means to put him on the cross and waste metal, which was valuable at the time? They nail him to the cross, they stick a spear in his side. They basically go out of their way to be as cruel to this man as possible. but then after he's dead, they afford him a luxury they don't afford anyone else, and they return his body to his loved ones to be disposed of respectfully. That makes no sense whatsoever. Okay, but that's not the only reason. Another reason that I don't think Jesus ever had a tomb was because the Gospels were written well after Jesus died. Paul's books, I don't remember what they're called. I think it's like Paul's epistles or something. I only learned the term last night. I thought they were just all called the Gospels. But Paul's epistles were written relatively soon after Jesus' supposed death, if you believe in Jesus. We'll just assume that everyone does. So those were written fairly recently after Jesus' death. Now, Paul never met Jesus. He didn't know, never in his lifetime did they meet. But Paul claimed to have seen him afterwards, but we'll get to that in a minute. The important thing here is that nowhere in Paul's books, and Paul wrote 14 books, I think, of the New Testament, in none of his books does he describe Jesus as having a tomb. In fact, Paul says that Jesus was buried. Now, Paul did claim to see Jesus, but the circumstances that Paul saw Jesus were very strange. And, it was more, you get the sense of more of a spiritual sighting of Jesus. Like he saw the spirit of Jesus rather than the bodily form of Jesus. Because he was on the road to, I think, Damascus, and he sees a bright light, falls down, hears some voices, and depending on the account, either sees Jesus or just hears Jesus. And depending on the account, the soldiers that are with him hear it or they don't hear it. I think there's an account in, I don't remember where both the accounts are. I think the one in Acts, the soldiers hear it, and then there's another one in, I believe 1 Corinthians where they don't. I forget. But they, after he has this incident, he goes blind and does not eat or drink anything for 3 days. So even if you're to take this guy at his word, which you shouldn't, because Paul outright said that he's perfectly willing to lie to spread the truth of God. So right off the bat, this person should not be trusted in the first place. But let's say we do trust him. If you look at the circumstances, falls down, sees a bright light, goes blind, doesn't eat or drink for 3 days, that sounds like something we would associate with a stroke, or some kind of episode of some sort, or a seizure. That doesn't sound like he was walking around, riding or walking down the road perfectly healthy when all of a sudden, Jesus just popped out and said, "How you doing?" This was surrounded by some very weird circumstances. So I would not put much stock in what Paul said, which is actually point 4, I think. Or fact number 4 or 5 was that Paul saw Jesus. And I think that can be pretty discredited. And so basically what I was talking about the tomb, though, is that Paul never wrote about the tomb, because there's a specific word in I think Aramaic is the word the language it was written in originally. I forget, but let's just go with Aramaic, because that's what they spoke in the Passion of the Christ. So in the original Aramaic, there's a specific word for tomb, and it was not used to describe Jesus. And there is a specific word for resurrection, and it was never used to describe Jesus. The only time in the New Testament that we hear about this tomb is in the Gospels. Now, the Gospels were written well after Jesus was dead and well after Paul was dead. And if you look at the four Gospels, the accounts of what actually happened when they visited the tomb of Jesus, the empty tomb of Jesus, are quite different. All right, I'm about to read an excerpt from a debate on this very issue between Michael Horner and Dan Barker. And I'm only going to read about half of this list of inconsistencies found in the Gospels regarding this event, because the whole list would just take too much time. What time did the women visit the tomb? Matthew said, as it began to dawn. Mark said, when the sun had risen. Luke said, at early dawn. John said, when it was yet dark. Now, you mentioned John Wenham as a great harmonizer of the New Testament. John Wenham says, well, you know what this could mean. It could mean that even though John says it was dark when the women came to the tomb, it could mean that it was dark when they left for the tomb. Aha! It took them a while to get there, and then the sun came up. But that's overly speculative, and it's obviously a defense, ad hoc rationalization to these contradictions. Who were the women who came to the tomb? Matthew said it was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Mark said it was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and Salome. Luke said it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women. John says it was Mary Magdalene. What was their purpose? Matthew said it was to see the tomb. Mark said no, they'd already seen the tomb. It was to bring spices to anoint the body. Luke said that they had already seen the tomb and brought spices. John said the body had already been spiced before they arrived. Was the tomb open when they arrived? According to Matthew, it was not. The tomb was opened in their presence, but Mark, Luke, and John say, yeah, the tomb was open when they arrived. One of these guys is wrong. They can't both be right. Who was at the tomb when they arrived? Mark said there was one young man. Now look at how this supports the evolutionary hypothesis here. Mark said there was one young man. Luke said there was two men. Matthew said there was one angel. And John, the last writer, said there was two angels. See what's happening here? See how the myth is growing and getting more exaggerated? Where were these messengers situated? Matthew said there was an angel sitting on a stone. Mark said there was a young man sitting inside on the right. Luke said there were two men standing inside. John said there were two angels sitting on each end of a bed. What did the messengers say? Now this is really strange. The messages are so different. In Matthew, the angel, or the angel said, go quickly, tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead. Behold, he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall ye see him. Mark generally says the same thing, but Luke gets it backwards. Remember how he spake unto you when he was yet in Galilee, saying, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and on the third day rise again? The whole Galilee thing got twisted around. Luke was for a Jerusalem center of Christianity, so he downplayed Galilee. In John, what did the angel say? Women, why weepest thou? Did the women tell what happened after they left? Matthew said yes. Luke said yes. They returned from the tomb and told all these things to the 11 and to all the rest. But Mark said no. And they went quickly and fled from the sepulchre. I don't know how to pronounce that word. For they trembled and were amazed. Neither said anything to the man, for they were afraid. One of these writers got it wrong. John said yes, they did tell. When Mary returned, did she know that Jesus had been resurrected? According to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, yes, but according to John, she did not know that Jesus had been resurrected. Did Mary first see Jesus before or after the return to the disciples? Matthew and Mark say before, but John says after. Could Jesus be touched after the resurrection? Matthew says yes, but John says no, and then John changes and said yes. And the list goes on like that. So, I don't know how much stock you want to put in that. So the only fact left is that James, Jesus' brother, Jesus appeared to his brother James, and well, when it comes to James, I don't really know much about James. I was looking, trying to do some research in the matter. I could only find one verse that talked about Jesus appearing to James, and it was just a single sentence that said basically that. Jesus appeared to James. Or something along those lines. It was just this single little sentence tucked away in 1 Corinthians somewhere. And I thought that was just really strange. I didn't have a chance to do too much research into James, but I will say that, Kay Bain's argument is that, James would not have wanted his brother to appear to him because he never believed in his brother's words in his lifetime, and it was a great source of shame for your family to disavow your teachings as a rabbi. So they had a strained relationship. But, when you start talking about, it wouldn't be in character for Jesus to appear to James, you're psychoanalyzing someone who's been dead for 2,000 years and for which no real record exists. So, you're trying to guess at the psychology of a man who you know nothing about whatsoever. And I think that's a little bit ridiculous. Let me see if I can remember any other of your points. Oh, you mentioned that if the story was a lie, women would not have been the first one to discover that Jesus' tomb was empty. Now that's not true, because if the person telling the story was a good storyteller, then there would be that element of suspense and doubt. You have someone telling you something that's really fantastic, good news, but on the downside, it's someone who society considers unreliable rather. And this is a gimmick that's used even in stories today. The unreliable witness is a source of dramatic tension. I was reading a book just the other day by Dennis Lehane. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He writes mystery novels. There was this great shootout scene on a bridge, and what happened in the scene was that, they have this great shootout at like 3 a.m. on this bridge, and only one person witnesses it. And, the main character thinks that this person's point of view will vindicate him, but unfortunately, it turns out that the witness is, failed a sobriety test, has all kinds of priors for drug use and drug offenses, so the cops pretty much ignore his testimony. So the unreliable witness is a source of dramatic tension, and you can, watch movies, read a lot of books, and you'll see that as a motif that arises constantly in fiction. And that's exactly what this story is. It's a complete fiction. And I think that when we look at your facts, in order here, we have Jesus appeared. Okay, Jesus was crucified, which is probably true, but also completely irrelevant to whether or not he rose from the dead. The tomb, Jesus did not have a tomb. I can say that with almost binding certainty that Jesus was not entombed. And I think it's pretty ridiculous to assert otherwise at this point. Number 3 was that Jesus appeared to his disciples, which is just according to Paul, a known propagandist, and someone who outright said that he would lie to spread the gospel of God, and someone who was probably power hungry, and who was trying to seize a lot of clout in the growing Christian community at that time. Then, you have Jesus appeared to his brother James, his probably grieving brother, who might have felt guilty about, the fact that he never relieved his brother in life, or may not have seen Jesus at all because, like I said, the whole thing is given to us in either by Paul's version, Paul being a known liar, or the gospel version, the gospels being written well after the fact, plenty of time for legend to kick in. And, let's see, what else? This is actually not something he said in the video, but, let me get through with the facts. The other fact was that he appeared to Paul under dubious circumstances, wherein, with seizure-like symptoms included. And, so that's all your 5 facts. I don't think that any of those 5 facts hold up to scrutiny or could be called facts. The first one might get away with being called a fact, But even then, I think that there's enough doubt on it to just call it a strong possibility and not exactly a fact. So I feel no need to construct a story around them, but I'll do so anyway, just to show you that I can. And it's very simple. You just say, yeah, okay, he died and he came back from the dead, and that's fine. But does that prove Christianity? Of course not, because now you've opened the doors to supernatural solutions to any complicated problem. Anytime there is something that doesn't have a explanation that is based in reality, you can just make up a supernatural thing. Where did Jimmy Hoffa go? He was abducted by aliens, obviously. You know, what happened to the people at Roanoke? You know, they were eaten by Godzilla. I mean, you can, I mean, it's a very clear-cut explanation for what happened to these things, these mysteries that are scattered throughout time. But it doesn't really explain anything, because we know the explanation is bullshit. You can come up with a very simple supernatural explanation to any mystery that happened in our past. But, you know, no one would just accept them on the basis of that unless they had some preconceived notion of faith that told them that this was possible. And, you know, so let's say that Jesus did do all those things. Okay, well, what if he did all those things and he was actually Satan in disguise, trying to distract people from the true religion of Judaism? Or what if he was a cyborg sent from the future as part of a project to curb mankind's tendency towards violence? I mean, it could be, you know, you can come up with 101, you know, infinite supernatural explanations as to who Jesus was and why he did what he did and if he did what he did. But the fact of the matter is, none of that fucking shit happened. None of that supernatural garbage happened. You look at the raw facts, and they show a very different tale. They show a tale wherein, you know, you have the typical things that you have happening just today. People who want to get power, people who do crazy things, people who lie and exaggerate. And, you know, this is all the things that you associate with modern religion. And I don't think it was any different back then. And one thing that I was talking about with Kay Bain last night when we were IMing each other was he was talking about how reliable oral history is. Well, I think the contradictions in the Gospels, you know, counter this claim pretty sufficiently. But I also like to say that this idea you have that human nature has changed and back then people were more reliable is basically a variation of the blank slate argument that Steven Pinker and other evolutionary psychologists have totally dispelled with, you know, glaring accuracy.